In the summer of 1776, as the ink was still drying on the Declaration of Independence, the largest expeditionary force in British history was amassing off the coast of New York. The campaign that would follow would feature some of the largest engagements of the war and test the limits of George Washington's Green Army and bring the American Rebellion to the very brink of destruction. Welcome back to Private Lab. My name is Lee Gugino, and as always, I'm joined by Drs. Alex Burns and Andrew Bamford. Today, we're going to continue to commemorate the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution by taking a broad overview of the New York campaign. To help us tackle this enormous subject, we're thrilled to be joined by historian Jason Wickersty from the National Park Service. Together, we'll be exploring the strategic challenges facing both armies, look past a lot of the traditional narratives that we use to understand General Sir William Howe, and dive into the massive logistical effort required to keep the British war machine moving. Thank you for joining us for The Empire's Armada, the 1776 invasion of New York.
Today, we are looking at the 250th anniversary of the New York campaign in 1776. One of the exciting parts about doing podcasts like this is we can be joined by experts from all over the country and all over the world. So today we are joined by Jason Wickersty, who is a historian for the National Park Service, working at the Morristown Winter Camp National Park site, and also has done a lot of work transcribing Revolutionary War veterans' pensions. He manages the New Jersey's Revolutionary Generation Project, which is telling the story of Revolutionary War veterans and others in the state of New Jersey during this period. Jason, thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
Pleasure. Thanks for asking. A long-time listener, first-time caller, so this is great.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons I thought you'd be perfect for this. We were kind of talking about who we should have on for the New York campaign, and because you've done work on the American side, but you also have done a lot of work trying to understand the British side. You kind of put those things together. I think that's great. Do you kind of want to sort of set the stage for us in the summer of 1776? What kind of forces are massing around New York? What kind of assets and challenges do both armies face? Like, you know, what does the opening of the New York campaign of 1776 look like?
So, starting with the British side, New York has kind of there's a deep background here. New York doesn't start for the British in the summer of 1776, or in the spring and summer of 1776, when Howe had evacuated Boston, taken the army to Halifax, Nova Scotia, and was looking to open the campaign again down in New York. It actually goes back to 1774. New York was one of several potential flashpoints for the opening of hostilities for the War for Independence. The war starts, as we all know, at Lexington and Concord. The shooting war starts, but there were protest movements across the 13 colonies, and New York was one of them. And beginning in early 1774, there was a Tea Party in New York. There were effigies of Lord North that were burned around the city, a really active Sons of Liberty movement. And so, the situation in New York City is really starting to deteriorate. And the lieutenant governor of New York, Cadwallader Colden, is keeping a correspondence with Gage in Boston. And but Gage is having to deal with the situation there. Things are deteriorating there, and so much so that he's having to pull resources from New York. The Dartmouth ministry, Lord Dartmouth, the prime minister, he's still hesitant on taking a more aggressive stand on the protest movement, really hesitant about making moves that would lead towards open aggression or showing that the ministry was looking to come down hard on the protest movement. And so Gage is essentially fending for himself. And so he's pulling provisions, he's pulling ammunition, he's pulling supplies from New York, which had been the British military headquarters in America during the 7 Years' War. So there's a lot of material there. So he's pulling all this material into Boston, and this is concerning the loyalist population in the city. So far, they're holding out against sending representatives to the Continental Congress. They haven't signed on to the Continental Association so far. So they're doing their best to hold out, but there's a lot of rumbling in the city. And so, but still, Gage needs his supplies in Boston. And he actually orders his second in command, the Swiss-born general Frederick Haldimand, to fall back to Boston. And he actually tells him in a letter, like, when you leave New York, don't go in a general's uniform. Like, go incognito and get here, so to not raise suspicions that we're really pulling out of New York. Again, so the loyalist population's like, we still need support. You're taking all these supplies out. There's a small force of the 18th Regiment that's in the city, about 100 men. Eventually, some warships are sent down. The HMS Asia is sent to the harbor to kind of be a token symbol of British authority. And so something needs to be done in New York. And so by the end of 1774, there's conversations going on about replacing Haldimand and sending William Howe to America to act as a second in command and at New York. There's concern, and this is through a letter from Philip Skene to Lord Dartmouth, or actually to Lord North, I'm sorry, in January of 1775, that at the end of the year of 1774, they're talking behind the scenes, trying to get Howe, warm him up to the idea of serving in America, and Skene says that he, what does it say here? That I've seen General Howe, and I find it is not impossible to prevail on this brave officer to serve under General Gage's second command. But he also thinks it's a good idea to send him to New York because Haldimand, again, as I said before, he's Swiss-born. He's a foreign-born officer. And if something were to happen to Gage, the British military may not be so happy to serve under Haldimand. And so having Howe kind of as his buffer and using the Howe name, the Howe reputation, may add a little more, support to the troops and that are there in America at the moment, the waning morale. And so his name's starting to float around. And it actually starts to appear in some British papers by like the end of November 1774 that Howe's name is floating around for even commander-in-chief in America. And so at this, we're talking summer 1776. The British Army had evacuated Boston. They've gone to Halifax, Nova Scotia, to await resupply. When the Army left Boston, they were down to 17 days of provisions in stores, so they're very low on provisions. So Howe needs to wait for a new provisioning fleet to arrive before he can really do anything. But he arrives in Boston with about 9,000 troops from Boston, the Boston Corps, and he's going to stay there till about June and head on down to New York. Here, he's going to wait even longer, but for good reason. There are troops from Britain. There are new recruits, Highland regiments that are being raised. There are Hessians that are going to be sent from Germany. There are two divisions of Hessians that are going to be sent. Lord George Germain, the new Secretary of State for the colonies, has been doing real yeoman work over the spring of 1776, really mobilizing the War Department, the British war effort, by finalizing the treaties to bring more forces to America. So in total, there's going to be about 13,000, just shy of 13,000 troops that embark from Germany in two detachments. The first division's about just shy of 9,000. So they'll embark from Germany in about April, stopping in the south of England, near Plymouth, Spithead, for a little while before making the crossing, the Atlantic crossing. There are, as I mentioned, the Highland troops are going to be departing from Greenock up in Scotland. There are two new battalions of the 42nd Foot. There's the 71st Regiment that's being raised. And there's also an expedition to Charleston, South Carolina that was sent in January. This was a personal pet project of the king, actually, by direct order. This was something that he wanted done. There was accounts of loyalists in North Carolina and South Carolina, and they wanted to support the royal governments down there and assist with the loyalist forces in maintaining crown authority. So General Clinton was chosen to lead an expedition down to the Carolinas, and troops were sent from Ireland. They would rendezvous with Clinton off the coast of the Carolinas, and would eventually return to Howe's army once Clinton's job was done in North Carolina and South Carolina. So over the course of the spring and summer of 1776, there will be about 24,000 British troops that will land on Staten Island. Again, the Boston Corps arrives towards the end of June, landing on Staten Island around the second and 3rd of July. They land on the island and start to encamp across the North Shore, and then by the beginning of August is when Brigade of Guards arrive. There's a draft amongst the guard regiments in London. They will arrive at the beginning of August, along with Clinton's corps from South Carolina. There's about 3,000 troops from South Carolina that come up, and again they land on Staten Island. The Hessians are the last to arrive. About the 12th of August, they'll land on Staten Island. And so again, as Howe's ready to make the leap over to Long Island, he's got about 24,000 troops there. So why New York? I think for the British perspective, it's actually best to think of the New York campaign actually as a theater opening campaign. So when Howe evacuated to Boston, essentially, he had left the continent. There were essentially no more British forces on the East Coast of the American colonies. And so he needed to reestablish a foothold in America. And New York had been, during the 7 Years' War, the British headquarters in North America. And as you mentioned, yes, it's got a large harbor, a perfect anchorage. There is a loyalist base there that through 1774 had been holding out. It was one of the last colonies to really kind of fall, if you will, to the American side before the Sons of Liberty kind of took control of the government and forcing Governor Tryon to retreat to a ship in the harbor. So it's reestablishing this foothold in New York. The harbor is important. It's deep. It's large. Perfect for the Royal Navy, and also part of the British strategy was to keep an open communication with Canada. And actually, the Lieutenant Governor of New York, Cadwallader Colden, had kind of broached this himself. He said it was important to keep the Hudson River open because supplies, troops, news could pass the river from the rebelling New England colonies and make their way south. And so there are multiple angles here, multiple benefits to taking New York, to prevent that communication and to prevent the communication amongst the Americans, but also to keep open communication with British forces in Canada. So this is an important place for Howe and the British war effort. And so Howe initially intends to sail to New York and immediately begin operations. He would hope that, in a way, the sort of euphoria amongst Washington's army at having driven him and the British Army from Boston, that would kind of lead them into making some rash decisions and immediately attacking without thinking too much about it and putting them at risk. So Howe wants to get to New York as soon as possible, but he can't. He's stuck in Halifax because he's awaiting provisions. He's awaiting resupply. He's awaiting reinforcements from Britain. But nevertheless, his goal is New York. And as time goes on, he's having to adjust his strategy and adjust his goals. And so he's able to leave Halifax in June of 1776, and he actually sails himself ahead of the fleet. He's going to head down to New York first, kind of size up the situation. And he leaves a message to his second in command, Lord Percy. Is at the time the official second in command of the army is General Sir William Henry Clinton, who's in South Carolina at the time. So his kind of breveted second in command is Lord Percy, and he sends a note to Percy as Howe sends a note to Percy as he's leaving Halifax, giving him kind of the plan just in case Howe were to go missing. So he tells Percy that the possession of New York is the goal, not the destruction of Washington's army, but taking New York and moving through Long Island is the primary goal. So if I'm not there when you arrive with the fleet, just wait a little bit and then make the move on Long Island. But if Washington offers battle, don't deny it. Particularly if it's on some equal terms, don't deny battle. But your goal is taking New York. So that's Howe's main priority is taking the city and reestablishing that foothold.
If you're enjoying this episode of Prime and Load, the best thing you can do to help us grow is to tell somebody about it. Not a review, not a rating, just tell one friend. One history lover, one person you think would enjoy it. Reviews are great, but they're never as powerful as a personal recommendation. We're still a small show run by people who genuinely love this period of history, and word of mouth is how shows like ours grow. If there's someone in your life that loves this period, or even the Napoleonic Wars or the American Civil War, please share with them your favorite Prime and Load episode. After all, who would Napoleon, Lee, or Grant be without Frederick, Marlborough, or Washington?
Could I just chip in with a question there? Because I mean that's one of the main things I've picked up reading on this campaign, that Howe gets a lot of criticism for failing to destroy Washington's army. And obviously you said that for the good reason that he's not actually trying to. And that's sort of keep on reassessing things. But I mean, it does slightly beg the question: how, in that case, does he envisage physically taking New York will help end the war? What's the so what of taking? If you captured New York and Washington's still got the entire Continental Army camped just outside New York, it doesn't seem to this ill-informed correspondent that you're much further towards victory.
Yeah. So Howe intends to engage the army, to engage Washington. It's just that the timeline now is making this impossible for him. Again, the primary goal is a foothold in America for resupply. And I think that's because Howe, again, kind of in what doesn't appear in most of the popular narratives is that, we a lot of histories tend to view Howe as sluggish, indolent, kind of ignorant of or conventional in strategy and tactics. But Howe actually is a logistician. He's very keen on supply. He's very aware of sustainment for his forces, for his army. We get a little glimpse of that in Boston when he's in conversation with Clinton, where they're talking about assaulting the American works near Phipps Farm, and they're kind of bouncing ideas off of each other how to do this, and Clinton's essentially like, just hit them, do it, attack, and Howe is like, but how do we supply it? How do we resupply it? And this is a strain that runs through Howe's command in Boston when in November of 1775, he's filling Lord Dartmouth in on the situation in the army, and it's a file full of returns, reports of provisions, wagons. He actually gives recommendations or requests for how their meat provision should be packed in small barrels so they can move quickly. So he's very aware of the supply situation. And I think one thing that really stands out for Howe in comparison to Gage and even Clinton is that once Howe takes command, he's also writing to the Secretary of the Treasury talking about supply, provisions, asking the lords of the Treasury, send me forage, send me pork. So he's very aware on feeding the army, sustaining the army. And so New York, having that port, having the ability to get provisioning fleets somewhere to feed his army, it takes precedence over destroying the army. And he lets Germain know this fairly early on too, that he's expecting a second campaign. It's not a surprise at all that they're going to need a second campaign. So Howe's fully aware of this. He's comfortable with this idea. The important thing is to gain this foothold in America, be able to sustain the army, and then we'll take care of Washington. So I think that's paramount in Howe's mind.
That's really interesting. So New York City is almost like a perch to continue the fight against the Washington maybe in a future year. Just at a very high level, very broad brushstrokes, can you walk us through? I mean, there's many battles that happened in the New York campaign. We kind of moved from Long Island onto Manhattan, kind of moving north from Manhattan. What are as you see them, just shoot sort of off the cuff? What are the main phases of the New York campaign?
Yeah, so I think the initial phase is staging. So the Americans have been the American army has been in New York since January and February of 1776, preparing. They knew that New York would be a target, and so Washington had sent Charles Lee to the city to begin fortifying it. He thought it was a crazy idea to hold the city. It's just the extent of the rivers and territory that needed to be defended he thought it was almost impossible, and not worth the effort. But he wanted to make the city itself as costly it can be to the British Army if they were to take it. But he knew that ultimately it was a fool's errand to keep New York. So again, the American Army's been there since January preparing the ground, building fortifications on Long Island. They've been building barricades in the city itself. There's an incredible intelligence report that comes to Governor Tryon and eventually to Lord Germain in London, detailing every work in the city and Long Island, down to the number of embrasures. There's fascined barricades with artillery down the city streets. It's really impressive, and this is in early June, so we have a really good snapshot of what the city looks like and Long Island looks like before the start of the campaign. So for the British now, they're on Staten Island. Howe was awaiting supply. Lord Germain, who had taken the reins as Secretary of State from Lord Dartmouth, is doing incredible work, not only getting the Hessians involved, he's really having to build the British war effort, making them take a real serious war footing, and so he's having to hire transports to bring the Hessian troops over, the Scottish reinforcements. They've essentially wiped out the British civilian maritime shipping. They're having to hire shipping from the Dutch, and he's having to deal with all those contracts and things. He's having to oversee the building of a wagon train, hiring horses, artillery, and so all of this is having to be staged in Britain and then sent over to Staten Island. And they're also having to establish essentially a centralized provisioning depot. It had been kind of a haphazard means of sending contracts to agencies across Britain to supply the army with pork, and the fleets that were being sent were really inconsistent. And so Germain oversaw the establishment of a centralized provisioning depot in Cork on the south of Ireland to have a more regular system of supply. So all of this is being established in Britain, while on Staten Island, Howe is having to wait for all these supplies. And he's also having to build his own kind of transportation system. I think one thing we don't appreciate with British commanding officers in this period is that there's so much more that's on their shoulders. There's so many more duties that fall under the responsibility of the commander in chief, other than just strategy and overseeing the troops and directing battles. So Howe is responsible for essentially creating his own army-wide land transportation corps. There is no Red Ball Express like during World War II, in the American Army in World War II. There is no, internal logistics corps. This is a new concept, really, in the 18th century. We have quartermasters and quartermaster generals, but there isn't this system of, army-owned wagons. So when Howe arrives on Staten Island, he has to build his own transportation corps by hiring local teams and local wagons from the loyalist community on Staten Island. And he's also trying to reestablish crown authority and stability to the loyalist population, as well as supply the army. They try to establish markets across Staten Island so that the local population can sell their goods and get hard money, and also resupply the British Army with fresh vegetables and fresh provisions to supplement the salted meats that they've been receiving from overseas. So what most historians kind of describe as this delay, this sort of just buying time, and this confusing delay on Staten Island in the summer of 1776, there's actually real work being done to build out the army so that it can maneuver and move more quickly and operate in the theater in New York. There's also a lot of intelligence gathering too. Lord Percy is doing an incredible job of gathering intelligence from American deserters and from the pickets across the island. Staten Island, if you're not familiar with the New York area, is very close to New Jersey. The Arthur Kill is a really small waterway. And so on the other side in New Jersey are the towns of Woodbridge and Rahway and Elizabeth. And so they're able to get intelligence from deserters from New Jersey militia, from the flying camp that is established in Perth Amboy. So there's a lot of information gathering going on too. So the first stage of the New York campaign is really this staging operation for Howe on Staten Island, preparing for the campaign and awaiting the additional troops that are going to arrive and provisioning fleets.
That's great. So, having logistically prepared the way and gathered intelligence, when Howe decides to sort of move towards and on Long Island, and there are American forces there sort of waiting for him. I mean, again, I think our listeners would be fairly familiar with the tactical nuts and bolts details of the fighting on the Battle of Brooklyn, the Battle of Long Island in August of 76. One of the major debates about how, at least that I'm familiar with as a historian who sort of looks at tactical stuff a bit more, is after the victory on Long Island, there's almost like the slowdown in the operations. Like he decides to open, I think, formal siege or start digging siege parallels to try and get at the American fortifications. And of course, Washington is able to escape. Any idea why Howe makes that decision?
Yeah. So. And this is may seem a little maybe contradictory, or it's because of indiscipline. I would say it's because of indiscipline, and this is an interesting theme that runs through Mark Urban's book about Fusiliers, in David Smith's study of Howe and the British Army, and I think it follows through here to New York. Again, the kind of the popular narrative is how kind of maybe chickens out. He's kind of having PTSD flashbacks to Bunker Hill because of the carnage and it's the bloodshed, and he just doesn't want that to happen again because the works on Long Island are impressive. I mean, they are real works of military art, and so generally it's thought that Howe kind of steps back and hey, let's not just throw everybody at the works, and we may be victorious, we may take the works, but let's take a moment and think this through. But I think it's because of indiscipline, and actually indiscipline that Howe witnesses at Bunker Hill. The Grenadiers advance without orders. There's friendly fire incidents. These are green troops that are seeing combat for the first time, and so obviously it's a shocking situation for them, and what other officers like Frederick Mackenzie call impetuosity, or even the zeal in the Zeal and Bayonets Only, that can lead to very bad things. And so again, the at Bunker Hill, troops step off without orders, and it leads to chaos. And so there's the very real chance of that happening again at Long Island. The 33rd, the Grenadiers, they push on. They want to take the works. Howe stops them and pulls them back because I think he has that memory of Bunker Hill and the indiscipline and the breakdown under the light infantry at Bunker Hill. That's the memory he's taking. That's the primary concern he's taking from Bunker Hill and applying that to Brooklyn. And I think there's also, the assumption that the war would end if Howe were to take the works too. That it was like you're gonna capture Washington, the war's over, and I think that's a really big leap. And I think also Howe, that's the last thing on Howe's mind is to take large number of prisoners too. Because again, as I mentioned earlier, Howe again is a logistician. He's thinking about supply. And there's another memory from Boston, I think, that is in the back of Howe's mind that is guiding his actions here. So when the troops were in Boston, Howe left in March of 1776 with only 17 days of provisions. He was expecting a resupply from Britain. It was supposed to arrive in the late autumn of 1775, but it never arrived. And Germain had actually secured contracts with the ship owners that Howe would be able to use those ships as transports to evacuate Boston and get to New York. And so there's this whole expectation of having provisions, being able to evacuate New York, and it never shows up. So I think in the back of Howe's mind is, I don't know when, I can't be guaranteed when my provisioning fleet's going to arrive. And that's very important in New York because when the campaign starts, he has about 116 days of meat provisions on hand in store. There's really great, essentially 18th century spreadsheets by the Commissary General, Daniel Chamier. And so in August, just before the campaign starts, Chamier submits the return for provisions on hand for the army. And it's 116 days of meat provisions. And he also calculates out, peas, oatmeal, butter, other things. But again, 116 days of meat provisions. But he's only calculating for 20,000 men. So that means there's a lot less on hand for the number of men in the army. And so if you take 10,000 prisoners, or if you have 5,000 prisoners or 6,000 prisoners, you have to feed them. And granted, it's on 3/4 ration, but you still need to feed them, and you still need to put them someplace. And this is before Howe has taken the city, so the harbor isn't open to the prison ships or warehouses. So the only place available to Howe is Long Island, and the only area that is under the control of the British Army at this point is the area behind the lines in Brooklyn. So where do you put these men? How do you feed them? So I think the idea of having an additional multiple thousand mouths to feed from your very limited stocks of provisions with an unsure about when those provisions are going to be restored, I think that too is operating in the back of Howe's mind, where he's like, let's slow up. And again, his primary objective too is taking the city, not destroying the army at this point.
Hi, this is Lee Gugino, and on behalf of Alex and Andrew, I want to say thank you so much for listening to this episode, and we really hope you're enjoying it. But did you know that this is only part of the conversation? Typically, our recordings are anywhere between an hour and a half to 2 hours long, and we have to cut them down to stay within our upload limits. But you can get full access to these uncut versions of every episode by joining the Prime and Load War Room on Patreon. For just $3 a month, you can listen to the additional 20 to 40 minutes of content that you don't get here, and all of it is commercial free. If you want even more, you can also upgrade and gain access to exclusive bonus episodes that can only be found in the War Room. If you're enjoying Prime and Load and want more, use the link in this episode's description to visit the Prime and Load War Room today.
And so, just again, very very broadly, how does he go about it? So from fought the Battle of Long Island, Washington's evacuated in the fog and whatnot. How does he go about taking the city after this this escape on the part of the Continentals?
Yeah, that's great. So So once Washington has escaped into New York, into the city of New York, Howe moves the British Army, his forces, up to Newtown in Queens. But he sends the Hessian troops to consolidate the gains at Brooklyn Heights. And so they're there, they're behind the works. They're actually ordered to destroy the works, and they build batteries along the East River because they need to cover the logistical preparations for the next stage. There's going to be an amphibious landing on New York Island, on York Island, as they call it at the time. So Howe needs to prepare this battle space. And again, this is one thing that I think is overshadowed or underappreciated is the logistical preparations for and the time involved in preparing the next phase. So over the course of the next week or so, transports are bringing flatboats up the East River. But they're taking fire from New York City. Washington hasn't, at this point, end of August, very early September, the first few days of September, hasn't made the decision yet to evacuate the city. So Hessian troops along the works on the East River, on the Brooklyn side, are observing that they're still digging in and still building works on the New York side. And there are actually several instances of counter battery fire across the East River. So the river's not open by any means to the Royal Navy. It's not as easy as I think kind of the popular narrative makes it out to be. So as these ships are passing what's the Lower East Side, where the Manhattan Bridge crosses now, they're taking fire from American batteries and sustaining damage. But nevertheless, they're bringing these flatboats up the East River to Newtown Creek, as Howe anticipates crossing into New York above the American lines in the city, above the city itself. So he actually starts now this very methodical peace movement, piece by piece movement, I should say. It's like chess, and again, kind of opposite to what the popular narrative makes it out to be. He's just kind of waiting around. His brother spends a day on Staten Island to try to negotiate peace with Benjamin Franklin and John Adams. And so, it seems like it's just sort of cover for that and waiting for the next move, but there's actually some serious logistical work going on to make this movement. So the first move is Howe sends troops onto Montresor's Island, which is up near Hellgate, where about like 97th Street, where Gracie Mansion is now today. To kind of, I think to use an 18th century term, give jealousy and confuse Washington, kind of what the next move is going to be. And also, there's an American battery on the property, what's now Gracie Mansion, Carl Schurz Park. It's called the Battery at Walton's house. So again, East River, Long Island Sound, it's not open. There's this very serious battery that's there at Walton's house. And so there's movement onto Montresor's Island to kind of turn Washington's eye up that way. And there are batteries opened on the Queens shore in Astoria that open up against that battery to try to soften up and silence it, as the flatboats are still arriving on Newtown Creek. So Washington's kind of off kilter, but he doesn't know if the British are going to land higher uptown or lower. But the decision's made to assault at Kips Bay, a small inlet on the eastern shore of York Island, around like 34th, 36th Streets. And I think this here is like the pinnacle of British amphibious warfare in the 18th century. If I had that time machine and you could go back in time and see one thing, I would love to go back and see the landings at Kips Bay, because it's really I think the pinnacle of what was begun off the French coast in 1758, these descents and these amphibious landings. And also shows that the Howe brothers, not just General Howe, but Lord Howe, was really the right person for the job at this moment. Lord Howe wasn't guaranteed the position as commander-in-chief of the American squadron. It was just by chance that there's some complicated political machinations, and rather than resigning his role entirely in the Royal Navy, he was given command of the American squadron. And so he brings a wealth of experience from the 7 Years' War, where he was operating off the Breton coast in 1758 in these descents, amphibious landings around Saint-Malo, Cherbourg. And he oversaw not only the troops landing in flatboats, but he was essentially writing doctrine on how the fleet should arrange itself to covered landings. And this is 1758. He's doing experiments with building new flatboats for landing horses. So he's bringing his knowledge and deep experience of amphibious warfare, really a pioneer in innovating this type of warfare in the 7 Years' War. He's bringing that experience now to New York. And General Howe too is bringing amphibious experience as well. You know, we talk about his light infantry experience at Quebec, but he also served at Louisbourg. He served at Belle-Île. He served at Havana. And what do all these campaigns have in common? You know, they're amphibious expeditions. And so Howe brings the experience of an infantryman on board a transport in a flatboat, assaulting a beach. So those two men, who just happen to be brothers, are bringing their experiences in this new form of warfare, essentially, and they're demonstrating their skill at it at the landings at Kips Bay. And so on the 15th of September, the fleet arrays, five frigates array themselves off the coast in the East River, deliver a devastating volleys, covering volleys, as flatboats move out from Newtown Creek and cross the East River and land at Kips Bay. The American troops at Kips Bay, there's the Joseph Plum Martin is our famous friend, portrayed by Philip Seymour Hoffman in Liberty of the American Revolution, is there at Kips Bay, and just he describes the absolute just terror and the effect of the naval shelling and the assault on the works. And so the Americans are driven out pretty easily from Kips Bay. It's interesting that Clinton, being someone who's very aggressive, wants to attack, he's critical of this landing. Actually, the night before, he actually writes a note to himself, like, I don't know, we're going to walk into a slaughter here. I don't think this is a good idea. But I think the experience of the Howes, they were confident that this would be successful, and they make the landing. The Americans do escape from the city. Again, popular narratives are very critical of Howe for kind of seemingly letting the Americans escape. But once again, I go back to the city's the primary goal, and there's a limited amount of provisions in store for Howe. So that's not his goal, taking prisoners. He needs the city, and he takes the city.
So if you're Washington, if you've lost Long Island and they've landed above the city at Kips Bay, and now you've had to sort of move north out of the city, what's next? Like, how is Washington continue to kind of, like, use a very modern term, like, contest the battle space? Like, what is his next step after the landing at Kips Bay to try and hold on to York Island or Manhattan, or whatever you want to call it?
Yeah, so he's trying to maintain a foothold. I think for him too, the importance is keeping the defenses of the Hudson River, so keeping the Hudson River closed to the British, and also keeping them from making it onto the mainland. So the geography of New York City, Manhattan or York Island, it's an island. It's a 13-mile long island, and so It's connected to the mainland in the 1770s by only 2 bridges at the way far north, at Kingsbridge and Dykeman's Bridge, today up in like Inwood and like the 2 Teens. So he's trying to maintain that territory and prevent Howe from getting onto the mainland and preventing any more shipping from going up the harbor, going up the river. So Washington falls back to the heights, the Harlem Heights. So New York is the Manhattan Island. It's a really fascinating place in terms of geography, geology. There's a great book called Mannahatta that describes kind of the natural history of Manhattan. But it uses a British topographical map from the Revolution as its base. And if you look at this map, it's fascinating because today, if you think of Manhattan, you think of the city, you think of skyscrapers, you think of tall buildings, and maybe the smaller apartments on the Lower East Side. But largely, it's entirely built over, save some small parks in Central Park. So it's hard to get an idea of just how hilly and how dramatic the topography changes. And so down in the city, you're at sea level, essentially. But as you move uptown through Midtown, it gets hillier. The city at that point only made it up to, on the Broadway side, about Chambers Street near City Hall, and on the eastern side, on the Bowery side, it made it up to about Grand Street. So if you're having an espresso or a cannoli at Ferrara's in Little Italy, you're kind of at the extent of New York City of 1776. But as you continue north, it opens up into farms and to kind of more country estates and more rolling hills, and then it starts a dramatic rise. There's boulders, there's rocky hills, kind of think like Little Round Top at Gettysburg, or Devil's Den, these glacial boulders and glacial hills. And as you get into the 120s up near Harlem, you get these dramatic rises. You're at like 200, 250 feet above sea level. It's think like not quite as steep, but like a Point du Hoc at Normandy, and that'll come is especially important later on as we talk about Fort Washington. But he's on some very high ground and very difficult to assault, and so he's seeking safety up in those hills, and the British are now, once they've taken the city, they start constructing lines nearby. So there's again an operational pause here that again in many popular histories is like, what's Howe doing? He's just wasting time. They're just looking at each other. But there's a real operational pause here to once again consolidate gains and build lines and plan further operations, and also take some time to open up the Hudson River, again, in a very methodical, piece-by-piece way. So, Washington's trying to stop any further advances from the Army and the Navy up the island. And at this point now, in mid-September, the British are now, General Howe is now taking the city of New York and establishing and constructing fortifications through what's now like Upper Central Park in about the 90s and the 100s to kind of establish the lines.
Lee here for the Prime and Load team. We hope you're enjoying this episode, but if you want to hear more Prime and Load, our Patreon War Room is the place where you can get it. For only $5 a month, you get access to exclusive bonus episodes not available here. Here's a clip from our most recent bonus episode.
This is a major problem for Benedict Arnold. You're to some extent, if you're trying to continue to put pressure on the Canada, the main population centers of Canada, places like Montreal, places like Quebec, maintain control of places like Sorel, you want to try and prevent some sort of counterattack coming up from the west. And so Captain Forrester and his band of I think he's got about 40 men, but it's something between 32 and 36 men of the King's Regiment, and then a few Canadian militiamen, maybe a dozen, and maybe as many as 200, between 150 and 200 Native American warriors are approaching from the west, kind of trying to create problems for Arnold and his forces.
We hope you enjoyed that sneak peek into our most recent bonus episode. If you want to hear the rest of it, use the link in the description to sign up for our Patreon War Room today.
So, again, just kind of in a brief overview, Jason, could you walk us through maybe like the second half of the campaign? You know, Harlem Heights, eventually White Plains, and Fort Washington. You know, how do, as the Americans, how do we lose York Island and any chance of kind of keeping the city in contest?
Yeah. So, again, I kind of keep going back towards Howe, because he has the momentum. It's the operational momentum is really in his hands. He's kind of directing what's happening, and Washington's really just responding at this point too. So again, part of Howe's objective here again is to open the Hudson River for communication to Albany, to Canada. You know, at this point, General Carleton, Howe's getting intelligence that Carleton is coming down from Canada. He's descending. You know, the intent is to make a juncture with the army, and he's getting varying reports of that. You know, he's still in Canada. He's made it to Ticonderoga. He's at Albany. You know, so there's a lot of kind of mixed messages coming through here. But at the very very least, Howe needs to open that river just in case Carleton makes it down and a juncture can be made. So at this point, Howe starts to open the river. So he sends another amphibious assault across into New Jersey. There's a works at Paulus Hook. It's in modern day Jersey City, and so you know, the American batteries on the Hudson River side, they're still operating. Just as I mentioned earlier, there were American batteries on the East River, you know, firing on the transports and the frigates going up the East River, trying to prepare for Kips Bay. Same is true on the Hudson River. And you know, while ships are making it through, you know, in July, the Phoenix and the Rose went up the Hudson. You know, while these ships are going through, they are sustaining damage. And if you know, you wanted to make an assault higher up the river with troops, and you wanted to send them by sea or by the river, and you're sending transports up the river, you know, the Phoenix and the Rose, you know, warships can take, you know, cannon shots much better than, you know, hired Dutch, you know, civilian merchant marine ships can that are being used as transports. So you need to open the river. So Lord Percy is sent across the river to Paulus Hook. It's easily taken. So now the lower Hudson is open. And now Howe needs to kind of finish the job and move Washington at least off of Manhattan Island. And I think that this also is a really critical point. And again, in Ira Gruber, and again, David Smith, they kind of noticed that around the middle of September, Howe changes his approach. To them, Howe had initially been very aggressive at trying to attack Washington, and now he stops, and now he's moving more towards, you know, securing land, taking ground, and that's true because, again, going back to the supply situation, the logistical, the provision situation. So on the 24th of September is actually when Howe gets his new kind of monthly return for provisions on hand. And as I mentioned earlier, in August, before they landed on Long Island, they had about 116 days worth of meat provisions on hand. But again, Chamier, the commissary general, is only calculating for 20,000 men. And again, the army is about 24,000. There's civilians, there's, you know, the women and children of the army, civilian workers, and there's still additional 2nd Division of Hessians that has yet to arrive, another additional almost 4,000 troops. So, the supplies are dwindling. So in mid-September on the 24th, when Howe gets his new provision return from Chamier recalculates, and now there's only about 50 days of provisions on hand. And so how do you plan more offensive operations with only enough meat provisions on hand to get you into the middle or end of October, or early November? And again, you don't know when that provision fleet's going to arrive. Then that experience of Boston, having that provision fleet just not show up, I'm sure is weighing heavily on Howe. So he writes to Germain the next day with a really pessimistic tone. His after-action report from Long Island is pretty glowing about having pushed Washington off the island, and they're gaining ground. They're taking the city. They've done a really stellar job so far of achieving their Howe's goals. But now he's like, I have a bad feeling about this. We can't really do much more of this campaign. So it's a real stark shift in Howe's tone. And so Howe needs to get Washington off of Manhattan Island, and I'd argue open up at least a route to the mainland in Westchester County and even across to New Jersey. So that's his goal now. And the plan is, since Washington is in the high ground and on the heights above Harlem and Upper Manhattan, it'd be madness to assault that. So he needs to turn the flank. So he turns to his brother, and they plan another amphibious assault. And so they land in Westchester County. They board transports and land in Westchester County, first at Frog's Point and later at Pell's Point. But again, I think this is another moment where the experience of Lord Howe and his experience in France really kind of comes to the fore, where Andrew, again, you've done the amazing work on the landings at Cancale in Brittany. I think the landings here in Westchester at Pell's Point is kind of an echo of Cancale. And for those listeners who aren't familiar, in 1758 there was an attempt by the British to attack the town of Saint-Malo in Brittany, and Lord Howe oversaw amphibious landings on the beaches at Cancale, and the British attempted to attack the Saint-Malo. They were unable to, and they fell back to Cancale and once again boarded transports and attempted another landing later on in the summer of 1758. It's very similar here at Frog's Point. There's a landing. The British Army moves inland. They attempt to cross and move up Westchester, but they're unable to cross a bridge. They spend a few days, but they're stopped because they can't afford a bridge. The area is defended by Americans. They're pushed back. They're unable to take the route that they intended up from Frog's Point. So they fall back. Once again, reboard the landing craft and shift further up the Westchester coast to land at Pell's Point, where they're engaged by American troops. There's the famous Battle of Pell's Point and Glover's Stand, but the Howe's able to push on from there. He's not denied the advance up through Westchester. Yeah, I was sorry. No.
So, in terms of kind of pursuing Washington up the island of York, like what is Howe doing? What are the major obstacles left that the British have to overcome before they fully control the island?
Yeah, so at this point, we're middle of October. Howe is landed his forces on the Westchester shore. They're moving northward. He's trying to maneuver Washington away. He is again, trying to preserve his troops. He's not trying to throw them into unnecessary casualties. Again, there's the indiscipline factor he's worried about. But again, he has time ticking away. Those provisions are being eaten. There's a supply fleet, a provisioning fleet that's maybe arriving. But what is arriving is also the second division of Hessians. So they will arrive around the 18th. And so this starts to factor now into Howe's plans in trying to maneuver Washington away and off, away from Manhattan, away from Westchester. So Howe's trying to, again, to use an 18th century term, give jealousy to the post road leading towards New England into Connecticut, and he's trying to lure Washington away from the city, and with the arrival of the Hessians, he sees an opportunity to box in the garrison at Fort Washington. And I think that this is also kind of an underappreciated or maybe overlooked portion of the campaign and maybe in Howe's strategy and thinking, where he's going to maneuver around and push around Washington and Westchester, and he also wants to take northern Manhattan and use Lord Percy, who is still on York Island, and make a diversion and cut off Washington's any possibility of Washington retreating back to Manhattan Island or York Island, and preventing the garrison at Fort Washington to retreat. Their only avenue would then be crossing the Hudson River into New Jersey to Fort Lee. So Howe lands the second division of Hessians, and they land at New Rochelle, which is on the Westchester shore, a little to the south of White Plains. He had heard, he's been given intelligence or information that the second division of Hessians wasn't as well disciplined as the first division. So he's like, this is like the B team. So let's kind of hold them back a little bit. But he uses them to again, to maneuver and as a threat to the garrison at Fort Washington. So he has them move westward to Kingsbridge, to the heights at Kingsbridge, taking Fort Independence in the Bronx, and essentially cutting off Kingsbridge. Meanwhile, Lord Percy makes a demonstration on Manhattan Island and attacks the American lines south of Fort Washington. So in the 120s and the 140s, there's a series of entrenchments and earthworks that are built by the Americans leading up that high ground into towards Fort Washington. So they make a demonstration down there, again, to kind of throw Washington off and have him kind of fall into not quite fatal indecision that he's later accused, but trying to guess what's going on. Is Howe heading up to Connecticut? Is he trying to what are Howe's intentions? So he's now maneuvered and boxed in Fort Washington, cut off Manhattan Island, and now he just needs to push Washington away from Westchester. And so there's the Battle of White Plains that's fought at the end of October of 1776. The Hessian troops assault Chatterton's Hill and push Washington away. There's an intended second assault that Washington plans to push Washington even further, but there are several points in the Revolution, the War for Independence, up to this point, where I think weather comes in as sort of a saving grace. There was a planned assault in Boston that was stopped by weather. Washington made his escape from Long Island to New York because of a fog, which I've seen this fog. I used to work at Fort Wadsworth on Staten Island, and these fogs come in pretty regularly. And the Verrazzano Bridge crosses right through Fort Wadsworth of these pretty giant towers, and the fog gets so thick that you can't see those towers. It's a pretty thick fog that rolls into the harbor on a regular occasion there, and it just so happens that one of these harbor fogs rolls in on the night Washington needs to escape from Long Island, and I think this is another case here at Fort Washington where, at White Plains where. Howe is planning another assault, but it's put off by rain, and I think it would have been kind of an unnecessary use of a loss of life, because at this point Washington's now been deciding to cross, move northward, and eventually will cross into New Jersey. So I think the weather here kind of puts a stop to Howe's further advance, and now he can turn his attention towards clearing Manhattan Island.
I mean, it seems then, judged by the standards that Howe has set himself, that the campaign has been a crushing British victories on everything that he wanted to do, and we know with hindsight that Washington does amazingly turn it around. But I mean, are there any positives to be taken out of it from the American perspective? The way the army conducts itself in the fighting, the bigger strategic picture, or is it just a British curb stomping session?
Yeah,
I mean, we've got to gloat on this one, right? We do.
Yeah, it's and in the British press after Long Island, it's the newspapers are full of poems about how the Howe brothers, the two brothers, there's toasts to the two brothers. It's this incredible celebration across Britain. From even the London press acknowledges that it's a major victory for Howe, which again it kind of cuts against the popular narrative that Howe didn't destroy the American army. It's a failure. But when he set out his initial when he set out his revised goals on the 10th of August in a letter to Germain, this was it. His goal was to take New York, send a detachment to Rhode Island, and open the Hudson for communication. And he did that. For the Americans, this is bleak. The army has, it's gained experience in combat. This was a Green Army essentially coming to New York. So this was Washington's first major campaign. So there's definitely lessons learned, but it's rough for the American army as they're retreating across New Jersey. So yeah, it's at a knife's edge here in late December 1776, and I think it comes much closer to ending in favor of the British Army than we acknowledge. There's particularly even after Trenton. Sort of the popular narrative talks about Howe sort of checking out. He wants to attend balls and have fancy dinners in the city, but even during the 10 crucial days in the period just between Trenton and Princeton, he's communicating with General James Grant, who's commanding the British detachment in New Jersey at New Brunswick, and he's essentially kind of nudging Grant to send troops to Morris County, towards Morristown, continuing operations through the early winter there, and I think that he stopped from that by, I should say, he's awaiting the exchange of some prisoners of the 71st Regiment that were taken prisoner in Boston in March of 76, and he writes to Grant if we're just if we only had the 71st, if we only had those prisoners, I would feel more comfortable making a full-on push to Morristown and Morris County. But once they get here, we can do this. But until then, do what you can. But it's really close, and Trenton really does change things. It really is earth-shattering, but it's much closer than I think we appreciate.
So one of the questions that we often kind of wrap up episodes with is, do you think there are any lessons in the New York campaign for sort of modern military officers? What if you had to say, is it Howe's focus on logistics? Is it his, where he puts his priorities? What would you kind of say are the main takeaways from this campaign?
Yeah, I would absolutely say logistics. It's absolutely logistics. That's in the back of Howe's mind, throughout this. I'd argue, looking through his correspondence that I've dug up. There's also the indiscipline and acknowledging the stresses of combat and green troops and but I think the story, the common thread throughout much of Howe's experience and what he's really concerned about is logistics. I think I mentioned earlier, once he takes command, he's writing to Lord Dartmouth about what supplies he has on hand, how they can form wagon trains, how to move quickly with packing meat in smaller barrels on pack horses. He's writing to the Secretary of the Treasury about when he can get new provisions or where he can provision from. And that's not something that Gage or Clinton do when they first take command. They kind of acknowledge to the Secretary of the Treasury that, hi, I'm here, I'm the boss now. But it's not to the extent and that Howe does. So I think logistics is key. And I know that's there's that phrase, amateurs study tactics and professionals study logistics, but it really was critical to the British effort in the New York campaign.
That's it for this episode of Prime and Load. We hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. Don't forget to sign up for our free newsletter with a link in the description. It's the best way to stay up to date on the show, see what's coming up next, and ask us questions. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, formerly known as X. This episode was hosted by Drs. Alexander Burns and Andrew Bamford. It was produced by Lee Gugino, music by Brianna Tam, Artie Sun, and Adrian Berenegger. Prime and Load is a Historic Studios podcast.